The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. It is Tuesday, July the 14th, 2026. We're live here at CHD TV. I'm standing in for Michael Caine this morning, but he will be back with you next week. We have a fantastic show for you this morning. In just a second, we're going to be bringing on Barry and Linda Smeltzer. I'm going to be talking about their new conference and healing provisions. Then we're going to go to a live people story with Danielle Gansky. Now, she was given prescribed psychotropic drugs at the age of 7. So we're going to be hearing about that. And then, of course, Dr. Meryl Nass with Johnny Vedmore. They're going to be talking about the life of Epstein and the New World Order. So this is a slam dunk show for you all this morning. But anyway, for now, let's bring on Barry and Linda Smeltzer. Good morning, Barry and Linda.
Morning, Polly.
Good morning,
Thanks
Polly.
for having us.
In 2 different locations, we know Barry is hard at work in his clinic, Linda hard at work in her other area. Well, now listen, healing provisions. Let's start with that. What is healing provisions?
Healing Provisions is a clinic and passion project that Linda and I started now 14 years ago about addressing all of the chronic exposures that our children have been dealing with that lead to everything from vaccine injury to chronic toxin overload to gut issues, all the things that lead to developmental delay. And what's interesting is over these last 14, 15 years, we've also now led to seeing adults, because so many of the families that we were treating, their parents were like, well, I have a lot of the same issues that my kid does. So, can I also be seen? And so that was something that naturally evolved, and bringing in the environmental medicine side of this truly expanded the level of understanding beyond just what are these kids exposed to from a nutrient deficiency and gut issue and all of that, to now understanding all of the things that beyond just an acute exposure, that total load theory makes such a difference to how their body's able to withstand that everyday exposure that leads to chronic inflammation, that leads to developmental delay.
Yeah, when you do sterling work, Barry, and about, just so you all know, to everyone out there, he has helped my family. You both have. Every single child at some point. So we're so incredibly grateful to you. Linda, the reason why you're doing this is just, I want to get onto your conference, but just let's get a bit of backstory here. Your third child was diagnosed with autism and was not born with it, correct?
Correct. Yes. Our third, we have all the medical records, and it does lean that it was vaccine injury. There was a definite decline after having all language, hitting all the milestones early, like nothing. And then it was like halt, stop, backwards. So even with delayed vaccines, because I didn't want to do them at all, but they kept pressuring while he was sick. Oh, you're fine. Go ahead and do it. And, you're a bad mom if you don't. It's just the same horrible, no good, rotten pressure. But yes, and he is now 20 and doing incredibly well. We were able to undo a lot of the damage, but is he how he used to be? No.
No, but I mean, here's the most inspirational thing. I mean, just to our viewers who don't know both of you, you're a powerhouse couple. You've been in this game for a long time, saving so many children, and your son, Nick, as well. And here's the thing. You're doing this conference, are you not, so that you can get help to these young parents and these people who already have injured children?
So this conference is actually a training for practitioners. So the Academy of Environmental Medicine is celebrating 60 years. And it's an incredible organization that is talking about all the environmental exposures, some of the ones that Barry mentioned, that are impacting health. So whether it's your mold exposure, viral exposures, VOCs within your home, whether it is long-term exposures to unknown pathogens or other components within your environment that have been negatively impacting them. So people don't necessarily always think about the pesticide buildup on their food, and maybe their body's not breaking it and excreting it correctly. So we always have these wonderful conferences with expert faculty hitting at various topics of, how to help your patients with this exposure, how to get them through this, whether it is with your typical prescriptive measures or non, but they all have the backing of the science and the exposures to explain this is what's going on with your patient and this is how you can address it safely to get that patient back on their feet and up and running in a healthy manner.
And so look at that lineup. You've got Erin Brockovich. So that's data centers, correct? Why would you think data centers is an important thing? I know it's a stupid question, but let's hear it from you.
Well, sure. Data centers are popping up everywhere, as Erin has delightfully told everybody with her map and then additional information from input from others that she's getting. They're signing NDAs and they're going everywhere. So people don't even have a say in their area. And Barry can go over the medical side of that. But we wanted Erin to join us once again because this isn't just, an impact that's small. These are huge. Here in Texas, we have an insane amount of them, and we are already having water issues, and they are sucking it all up, which is not good. It's causing, the electricity bills for people to go up, and so many more horrible things that are impacting health. And that's why we needed Erin to come and tell our practitioners and non-practitioners what's going on firsthand, and so we can start prepping and continuing to research the bigger impact on health. And that's what Barry will be presenting on at the conference.
Barry, what is the impact on health?
Yeah, this is going to be, Polly, the next issue that plagues our nation when it comes to environmental exposure. That's why Erin has led the charge on the exposure side, how many these data centers are being popped up everywhere. What we don't realize is this is the same kind of issue that we had with fracking. Remember when we talked about the fire coming out of people's faucets and the groundwater contamination and the burning off all the methane and the greenhouse gases, and they eventually started to make improvements in their actual processing of the fracking. Still not great, but it's better and it's more regulated. And there's a lot of companies now that went away because their practices weren't helping to extract that oil in the best possible way. So that has stabilized, but the AI data center side of it is a whole different animal, because not just groundwater contamination or possible air exposure. Now we're talking about massive amounts of water being hyper-cooled with tons of chemicals, and that's now getting downloaded into the aquifers. Like in Texas, we have a ton of aquifers, and that wastewater is now being dropped into all of those aquifers, and that over time continues to contaminate that drinking water with forever chemicals, with things that the body is not equipped to get rid of. But that's just the one step. Number two is the particulate matter. These AI data centers require massive amounts of energy. We're not talking about, what it would be like for a, big warehouse. This is exponentially higher. The data center that is being built in Abilene right now, just north of Amarillo, not Abilene, they're talking about it being 1.9 million square feet. This is how large. And to give you an idea of the energy demand it's going to have, you are going to be talking about the size of Manhattan energy consumption-wise times 2. We're not talking about everybody in lights. We're talking about significant amounts of energy demand. Well, that requires energy. How are they going to do that? They're burning fossil fuels at an incredible rate, dumping all sorts of particulate matter into the atmosphere, which also then travels around to different communities. And that's going to now create not only the water contamination. Now you're talking about air contamination. And the third that people aren't talking about is all of the unknown factors that are secondary and indirect. Number one being noise. People don't understand that these data centers put off all sorts of, basically, they call them either low EMF exposure for miles and miles, but even just the actual audible noise is almost to the point, the extremely low frequency. This is going to be an ongoing exposure that people will have building up in their system. But then there's also the audible noise of right around 92 to 96 decibels, which is basically having a power tool going on right outside your house. But this is 24/7. So it'll be ongoing. There will be constant noise pollution, and the body can't deal with that on an ongoing basis. That's talking about normal adults. We aren't even getting into what the impact is going to be on children in general, but then get to our children that are already hypersensitized, are already unable to deal with the environment they're already in. You're now adding another layer of exposure that is going to affect them from what they're drinking, what they're breathing, what they're hearing, and what's getting impacted on their body just from an electromagnetic field impact, not to mention all these indirect effects from what microbes are going to now thrive in this polluted environment. There are resistant forms of bacteria and mold that thrive when you have these cooled water with the contaminants in them. Plus, you now have all of that hyper hot, then cooled, and that creates a abnormal pH, which then leads to thriving different types of bacteria. So this isn't just about, the annoyance of having something near your community. And this isn't something that we're doing one in every state. You saw the map. The map has over 3,500 AI data centers that are already either working or in construction. And they're talking about at least double that over the next 3 to 4 years. So, Polly, this is going to be as big as Aaron says it's going to be. And that is, if you don't know if you have an AI data center near your community, you better find out, because it will have an impact.
Well, I'm so grateful that you're covering this. Catherine Austin Fitz has been warning us about this for years. And so here you are. This conference is so important. So you said non-practitioners can also go. Does that mean that the average person can? What's a non-practitioner?
Yeah, anybody who doesn't have that medical side to them, they can absolutely attend our conference. It's not uncommon for us to have people who are interested in health and their own exposures to come and advocate for themselves, learn more, potentially meet potential practitioners in person at a conference that they might want to go ahead and align themselves with as being their patient. So yes, absolutely. Our conferences are open to having other people other than our practitioners join us, of course, because we don't want to limit this information. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine has position papers out to help everybody fight EMFs and the other exposures that you could be dealing with, so that if they have to go to their city council to try to get the smart meters taken care of, not have a 5G tower next to the school. We are here to support everybody, but our primary focus is absolutely to train practitioners who are helping all ages get over their environmental exposures the safest and fastest way.
So what's the date and where is it? I can see the dates, the 6th to the 8th of August, and it's in Arizona. Can you tell us how people can get tickets?
Yes, they can just come on over to aaemonline.org. Our conference header is right there, as you can see. Click on it, and all the information is listed. We have outstanding speakers. You mentioned Aaron Brockovich is going to be there. We've got Callie Means, the HHS senior secretary or senior advisor, will be joining us. Dr. Joseph Latipo from Florida, he'll be joining us. And then as I mentioned, we cover all ages. So we've got Dr. Scott Antoine, our Pandas Pans practitioner, is going to be there. We've got coverage for EMF exposures. We've got Dr. Lynn Patrick joining us. The lineup is incredible. We've got book signings. Of course, we got to celebrate our 60 years. I mean, what other organizations and OGs still up and running and answers the phone? We do.
Well, look, thank you both for being on this morning. So Healing Provisions is where people go to find out more. And what else, Linda? What other things?
Yeah, if you want to, interested about learning about our office, it's healingprovisions.net, which is outside of our other job, because, why not go bigger? But yeah, absolutely. And if you have any questions about the conference, don't hesitate to reach out. And please let everybody know that your followers are more than happy or welcome to join our conference at our student retired rate of just $100. And if they're a practitioner, they can sign up, just add on those CMEs.
Amazing work you're both doing. Thank you for everything you have done and continue to do for us all.
Always, Polly. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Polly, for having us. We really appreciate it.
Okay, well, so everybody sign up for the conference if you can go. Well, now we're going to go over to Danny and Bob Schwartz now. Good morning, both of you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us.
Danny, I'm so honored to have you on this morning. Bob, talk us why it's so important that we listen to Danny's story, because you've really been heading up all of these stories.
Right. And thank you, CHD and Polly and everybody at the CHD family for creating this advocacy of the dangers of psychotropic drugs. Again, we're working closely and already starting the campaign for the National Adverse Drug Event Awareness Day for March 24th, 2027. And again, it's creating the awareness, caution, and accountability of what's happening with psychotropic drugs. We had two good episodes, the first ones, and now we're kind of changing gears a little bit and having Danny on talking about the polypharmacy. And her story is outstanding because it really shows what happened to her as a young child, and the same thing happened to me as a 40-year-old. So, Danny, I really look forward to hearing you.
Yeah, and Bob, we'll get you back on after we've listened to Danny, but thank you so much for introducing us to Danny. And Danny, I was last night going through your videos and horrified by what you went through as young as 7. Why would you ever be put on anything at age 7?
Yeah, so I was placed on psychiatric drugs starting at 7 years old. It really started because I was in 2nd grade and a teacher noticed I was fidgety, distracted, and not really keeping up academically. My parents were told by the school to take me to see a psychiatrist to be evaluated for ADHD. Very quickly after that first appointment, I was diagnosed, labeled, and medicated. So I was really far too young to understand what I was being given, let alone the lifelong impact that could have on my developing brain and nervous system. It started with stimulant medications like Ritalin, Concerta. I was a very naturally happy, sweet, silly, sensitive kid, but these drugs made me feel completely unlike myself. I became wired, moody, agitated, completely dysregulated. But instead of the medications being questioned, my reactions were interpreted as new or worsening underlying psychiatric symptoms. So another drug was added. That's really when Prozac entered the picture. And from that point forward, adding medication became the default response. And side effects were interpreted as new diagnosis. More drugs were prescribed to treat the problems that the medications themselves were causing. And I wasn't a child in crisis. I wasn't severely struggling, acting out, or out of control. I just didn't fit neatly into the narrow classroom mold. And, my parents, they were doing what any loving parent would do. They trusted the experts, followed the guidance of the medical professionals they had been taught to trust, but they were never given information needed to make a truly informed decision on my behalf. No one told them that these drugs could potentially cause life-altering neurological damage, permanent emotional numbness, permanent sexual dysfunction. And then no one told my parents that the so-called safe and effective drugs they were giving their child had only been approved based on short-term clinical trials lasting just 6 to 8 weeks. And those studies never examine the long-term effects of years of continuous antidepressant exposure on a developing brain, yet many children, including me, remain on these medications throughout childhood, their teenage years, well into adulthood, and in fact, unknowingly becoming participants in an uncontrolled real-world experiment.
Danny, I can't believe, because you were fidgety at school. Aren't all children fidgety at school? I mean, we're not supposed to be sitting in chairs at school. I'm really anti-school, by the way, having done all these interviews, because that seems to me where all the problems start. The teachers alert the parents, blah, blah, blah. So you're a little bit can't sit in your chair because you probably should be in a forest school running around playing with horses or whatever. And,
Right.
and instead you're put on psychotropic drugs. And then because of the side effects of those drugs, and then we see those images. Talk us through what's happening there. You're out of control with your tremors, correct?
Yeah, so I was essentially what happened there. So at 23 years old, this was in 2019, I decided to come off antidepressants to discover who I was underneath it all. Despite having taken the antidepressants continuously since I was 7 years old, my doctor tapered me off in just 6 short weeks. He technically wasn't acting recklessly. He was following the standard one-size-fits-all tapering guidance doctors are taught to use, regardless if someone has been on antidepressants for 2 months or 10 years, which is dangerously fast for most people. So what you're seeing there is this doctor-directed taper triggered a life-altering, like full-body neurological crisis. It was a level of physical and mental torment I didn't know was humanly possible. My brain felt like it was on fire. I experienced terror level fear, extreme, like cognitive collapse, visual snow, burning nerve pain. I would go into like these uncontrollable seizures. My whole body would I would just lose complete control. I experienced severe akathisia. I would spend hours in a fetal position on the floor screaming. Every light and sound felt like an attack on my nervous system. I became really, really sick. And I was actually completely bedridden and unable to care for myself. And I actually went to my doctor for help, and I was told antidepressant withdrawal didn't exist. And I was told my symptoms meant I needed the medication to begin with. And the injury caused by the drugs was used as proof that I needed to stay on them. So I was in and out of hospitals, emergency rooms, repeatedly dismissed. No one believed me. There was no answers. What I was experiencing was invisible. There was no way to no brain scans to prove what was happening. So they were able to deny it and just label it all as psychiatric. And from there, I really deteriorated. I was bedridden and disabled for years. I lost basic cognitive abilities. I got lost in my own home. But I think what people don't realize is this is not a mild, the doctor directed taper had left me with nervous system damage known as protracted withdrawal injury. So this is not like a mild and temporary withdrawal most people imagine. When they hear the word withdrawal, it doesn't mean you can just reinstate the drug and feel better. It's like the process of coming off the drug too quickly is like an insult to the nervous system, and reinstating doesn't fix that. So it's kind of like a traumatic brain injury or severe concussion. And I actually had to reinstate the medication just because the withdrawal was so severe, and I had been on them my whole life. So my body and brain were physiologically dependent upon it. Even though I don't want to be on this anymore, I really feel like it's poisoning me, but I truly can't come off of it. I'm trapped on it.
Still now, Danny?
Yeah, I did. So I had to reinstate it because I grew up on psychiatric medication. My brain developed and reorganized around it. I literally cannot come off it. I actually am, tapering off it and hope that I will be free from this drug that feels like it's poisoning my body. But it's really, really difficult. I taper by less than 1% every couple of months, but even that really can leave me bedridden and disabled because it throws me right back into that severe withdrawal. So it's really, of course, this is not just happening to be my window. My story is one window into a much larger hidden epidemic affecting countless people around the world. Um, which is why I'm raising awareness of these hidden injuries caused by antidepressants that people have no idea exist because doctors aren't aware of it. It's not on the FDA label. So I'm working to change that and make sure no one else is blindsided by risks they were never warned were possible or forced to endure the kind of harm that I and so many others have experienced unnecessarily.
Danny, all this because you couldn't sit still on a chair age 7. I can't even.
Yep, it all stemmed from that just because I couldn't fit into this preset box of what they think is normal of how a child should behave. And I wasn't fitting into that narrative of how they thought I should be. And it led them to giving me ADHD medication and created a prescription cascade of really dangerous drugs that cause very severe adverse effects, but they were always seen as anytime I would feel awful, like, I was so young, I didn't really have the language to advocate for myself. I would probably just say I feel anxious or off or depressed or whatever. And that was continually used as evidence that there was something else wrong with me, and they would just medicate me further and further. I was really trapped in the system.
Danny, what is your message to parents? And this is when no, we're not blaming any parents. I mean, look, I vaccinated my child who's brain injured now. We all did the best we could
Right.
with the knowledge we had then. But when you do better, you do better, right? So what is your message to those young parents when they get the call that their child can't sit nicely on a chair?
That's a good question. I think that it's okay if they can't focus or sit still. They're children. I don't really believe we're supposed to. I think as children, we're meant to play and explore and not sit still for 7 hours a day under fluorescent lighting. I don't think that's very natural. I don't think that's how we're meant to be as humans. And if you deviate from that normal, it doesn't mean that there's something abnormal with your child. It just means they need something different, like a different system or a different way of learning. It does not mean you need to be medicated. And I think also parents need to be aware that, of these risks that they're not told about. We're kind of told this narrative, these drugs are safe, effective, they're benign, they fix an underlying chemical imbalance, which is not true. That's never been scientifically proven. There's no such thing as a chemical imbalance that antidepressants or these psychiatric drugs correct. I think the benefits of these drugs are heavily overstated, while the real risk, including that these drugs are highly dependence forming and can cause life-altering, sometimes permanent neurological damage, are completely denied and hidden. And I think that parents should be aware of that so they can make a truly informed decision on behalf of their child. And perhaps from there, once they know these risks exist, they may choose something completely different.
Danny, what changes need to be made to prevent this happening again?
Yeah, so I think until the medical system and doctors and everyone recognizes these antidepressant induced neurological injuries exist, people continue to be blindsided and dismissed and gaslit. So I think at the core of this it's an issue of informed consent, meaning people are never told these injuries are even possible. And I think from a medical ethics standpoint, people deserve the full truth before taking these drugs and the opportunity to make that informed choice. And that's their right. But people right now are being denied that choice because they're never given the information needed. That's withheld. So I'm calling on the FDA to update antidepressant warning labels to clearly communicate the risks of protracted withdrawal injury, persistent sexual dysfunction, PSSD, emotional blunting, cognitive impairment that in some people can persist for years or even permanently after the medication has been discontinued. We also need the NIH to fund research into these antidepressant-induced injuries so we can understand the biological mechanisms and see what's happening in the brains and bodies and why some people become so severely affected and possibly develop treatments that can restore function and give hope to the people who have been living with these injuries for 30 plus years and have not gone back to normal. Personally, like for my injury, what caused my injury, despite like antidepressants being prescribed to millions of people, there's actually still no evidence-based guidelines to help doctors safely taper patients off of these medications. The good news is that is finally going to change, and I'm incredibly grateful to Secretary Kennedy for his leadership, and I can't thank him enough for shining a light on this hidden public health issue. Because HHS recently convened an expert panel with clinicians, researchers, patients to develop evidence-based guidance for safely tapering patients off antidepressants. I was actually part of that panel, which was such an honor to help inform the very guidance I wish had existed when I first came off these medications. My life was profoundly altered by the lack of evidence-based tapering guidelines. So this is truly going to save so many lives. So things are changing, and it's really incredible. And I think next is updating the labels and getting research and just getting this out there to as many people as we can so they can know these risks exist.
But Daniel, I'm sure your parents are very proud of you. I'm very proud of you. And how can people follow you?
Yeah, so you can follow me all my social medias, Instagram, Twitter at Danielle Gansky. And I'm coming out with a website soon, which will be daniellegansky.com, where I'm actually going to have a bunch of resources on safe ways to taper and education and studies on all of this, just one place where people can get all this information.
Daniel, I can't thank you enough for being on. Bob, do you want to come on for the last story? We've kind of run out of time, but do tell us why these stories are so important. And please, to the viewers, please share Daniel's story. It's very important.
Oh, absolutely. You know what? I'm, my soul aches hearing that's your story, Daniel. And I'm outraged. It's like the other stories. We're the dangers of these drugs are not talking about. If you get a chance, the audio of the many kids on ADHD pills, it starts as a drug cascade from the Wall Street Journal. Audio is phenomenal. It should be listened to by every parent that's thinking about putting their child on these medications, because this is crimes against humanity. It truly is. And it's outrage, and we're working hard every day to really educate the country about these medications. And Danny, again, I applaud your courage and thank you, and Godspeed moving forward. One last note, Polly, love to talk about what you're talking about, why these children are put on these drugs. We need to start teaching our children God-given skills. Overcoming adversity instead of an ADHD drug. Learning how to cope instead of putting somebody on a benzo. You know what? Grieving is part of God's way of going through a natural process instead of an antidepressant. Polly, listen to these figures. 337 million prescriptions of antidepressants last year, and 27% of the country are on benzo medications, anti-anxiety medications. Tom Cruise said it best in his interview with Matt Lauer 21 years ago. This is a brave new world we're entering now if we don't do something about this crisis.
Bob Schwartz, thank you so much, as always, for your education and coming on. And Danielle, yeah, exactly. Godspeed, and we'll be following you. And do come back and keep us updated on what's happening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
I really
PhD.
appreciate it.
Both. Okay, everyone, I'm going to go over to Dr. Meryl Nass. She has a fabulous show for you.
Steel Day, July 14th. This is, as I say, a big day in France, and it's a big day for me. I'm having Johnny Vedmore, Vedmore, as my guest. Johnny is a wild Welshman who has investigated the Jeffrey Epstein saga extensively. He's a wonderful investigative reporter. He's also a musician. He does many things. Let me read to you his bio. So he founded newspaste.com, where he provides exposés on intelligence-linked people such as Epstein, Nicole Junkerman, and Stanley Pottinger. Peter Thiel, Klaus Schwab, Elon Musk, Henry Kissinger, and more. He breaks stories. He finds previously unknown information. He was the first one to reveal Epstein's relationship with Elon Musk, for example, and Stanley Pottinger. He revealed Klaus Schwab's CIA training under Henry Kissinger and Schwab's father's work on an atom bomb for the Nazis. He is a podcaster, quiz show host, public speaker. He's written for Unlimited Hangout with Whitney Webb and the UK Column. He's on many social media, and we will give a list of many of his articles and links at the end of this show. So if you go to look below on the website, once we publish the show, you'll find a lot more about him. And so now, if we can bring Johnny on. So welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
So what we want to talk about today is to give people a sense of who Jeffrey Epstein really was, okay? So there is a lot of talk about sex trafficking and pedophilia, but that was actually only a sideline. That was not mainly what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. Epstein was it was owned by intelligence. He was a creature of intelligence. He was an independent actor, as was Stanley Pottinger, as were a number of other people. These people are fixers for the establishment, for the deep state, and for the intelligence agencies. And they have plausible deniability. So they're not getting a salary, but they're getting other benefits from the intelligence agencies. And that was really what he was doing. He was a genius, and he did very many pieces of important work for intelligence and for shaping the New World Order, creating the systems that are now being snapped into place to try and control us. And when he had developed those systems sufficiently, they were able to get rid of him. He knew too much. He was too much of a problem. He linked to too many people. And they didn't need him anymore because he finished pretty much the work that was important. So Johnny, he starts out, supposedly his dad is just a worker for Parks and Recreation in New York City, a very menial job, low paid. He's a Jewish kid in Coney Island, but somehow he drops out of college, but somehow he has an amazing career even in his early 20s. And if you can just start us off there.
Okay, I just want to say, wow, thank you for that. The first time I've been on hundreds of shows, I've never heard someone describe what Jeffrey Epstein was so perfectly, and include terms like genius as well, and to notice that all the salacious stuff is very much not only just a sideline for him, but was very much what the establishment wants us to focus on. They don't want us to see all the intelligence stuff. I would make one tiny note that I think at the end it became a tool of fifth generation warfare that was hard not to use. The P word had completely tarnished his reputation anyway, and so from that point on, he kind of accepted that he was a tool for the state to use within the dynamics of fifth generation warfare. But let's go back to the start. Indeed, there's a lot going on in the 1970s in America, especially in Jewish America. I mean, within Jewish communities, there was a lot of organizing going on in the 60s and 70s, late 60s especially. And people like Les Wexner made a bit of money and were part of organizing Jewish community groups. And I believe that in amongst there is probably going to be as forms of high achiever leadership courses that Epstein probably got found through. I think he's been targeted because he is obviously extremely good at a range of things that other people just are not very good at, and he can do a range of things. And once they realize how important he is and how good he is at moving stuff around, including money, but also dealing with people and making friends and influencing people, as soon as they work that out, they recruit him up and they bring him into running. And this early 80s, he's reported as sharing an office with Stanley Pottinger. That's at the time where Pottinger is running guns for the CIA in Iran-Contra, and Epstein and him are involved in this. There's Adnan Khashoggi's in there. There's all of the boys. There's some great names, some really interesting people, and this early period in the 1980s has to be given context, because there's something that happened in the 70s that was a technological revolution in the banking system. It had gone into computers. They'd started incorporating computers, and in doing that, they had to transfer a load of data from paper form into computer format, and everybody was going to find out all the secrets. All of the deep state funding had be left traces all over the banking industry. So certain people got brought in to help with this. It was a 1970s Banking Act that wasn't really implemented until the mid-70s. And certain people who worked for the CIA and hung around with Epstein, including Stanley Pottinger, were brought in certain firms to manage this transition and to hide a bit of the information. I think during that time, what happened is they realized there's a boom coming. They looked at it. We are now in control of how the information is coordinated, what's true or false within banking, what exists, what we can let people find, and so we can start afresh and we can build the system ourselves. If we are incorporating new technology and we are in control of the technology, which is a theme throughout Epstein's entire career, if we're in control of the technology, then we will be able to influence the outcome and benefit from it more than anybody else, and of course control it. And that's really what leads to the 80s. And Epstein's centrally hanging around in New York doing CIA programs, running money around the place. He's obviously dipping his fingers in loads of pies. There's some very well-connected, again, genius fixers, interlocutors, intelligence agents who are all hanging around in this same group. And that early 80s is like this boom time, but 1984 happens, and I don't mean it in the Orwellian sense, but maybe I do. But 1984 happens, and a federal agency based out of Washington. It was a very strange agency that no one quite worked out what it was doing, but it was it had been listening. It had bugged all of the phones in Stanley Pottinger and Cyrus Hashemi's office, and they had been working together. Cyrus Hashemi and Stanley Pottinger in 1979 and 1980 were forming a bank together, and then they went into the CIA and they said, hey, the hostages in Iran, we could make a deal with this. We could get Stanley Pottinger's best friend is George H.W. Bush. They want him and Reagan into office, and they say, go to the CIA, Cyrus Hashemi and Stanley Pottinger, and say, we got this idea. And they posit Iran-Contra for the first time. And the CIA say, you're not...
Let's tell the audience what Iran-Contra is.
Okay, so Iran-Contra is a complicated deal with Iran behind the scenes. So the CIA, they saw an opportunity to get their man George H.W. Bush into office. George H.W. Bush was the director of the CIA. He went to try and go against Reagan to win the election. It didn't quite work, but he gets in to be a vice president nominee. But they know that they're not going to really beat Carter without some sort of push, something special that comes up. And so they decided to make something special. The Iran hostage crisis had happened. The Iranians were in control of hostages, and around the back door, Cyrus Hashemi and Jamshid Hashemi, who were in business with Pottinger, had a lot of connections with Iran, and were able to say, hey, if we deliver you a load of guns, a load of arms, and the CIA works with, helping you form your own army and et cetera, behind the back door, and give you a load of stuff. How about you hold those hostages? And this is really a Republican Party effort. How about you hold those hostages for a little bit longer after October, and then it'll cause an October surprise in the election, and the election, which is expected to go to Carter, will swing towards Reagan and Bush, and that's exactly what happened. The October surprise happened, and it meant that Reagan got into office, and then 3 months later got shot. So I mean,
let me interrupt again. Okay, so it was a three-way deal where the CIA also wanted money to pay for a Contra war against the socialist government of Nicaragua.
Yeah.
And so what they were going to do was sell these weapons to Iran, which was supposed to be an enemy, because Iran had been taken over by the Ayatollah in 1979, which, by the way, was probably another CIA plot. We had brought the Shah over here for treatment of his lymphoma, paving the way for the takeover in Iran. So the money we got from the Iranians for the weapons then went to the Contras to pay for their war against the Sandinistas,
and of course,
which, by the way, was against the law because some of the Contras had killed and raped nuns. And so one of the congressmen from Massachusetts had initiated a bill which was passed in Congress saying no more money for the Contras. You can't support them. Mm-hmm. So this was a secret way of funding them. Now, I want to also get back to Stanley Pottinger. So we know sort of generally who Jeffrey Epstein was, but Pottinger was a Harvard-trained student and Harvard-trained lawyer who had worked for the government. So he did work, I believe, for the CIA for a while. He worked for the Justice Department. And he worked even, believe it or not, for what's now HHS. But then he went out on his own in his 30s. So in his 30s, in the 1970s, and became a private lawyer. But he's still doing these backdoor deals with the intelligence agencies. And he's still, at that time, he's working closely with Jeffrey Epstein, and they're both on the same kind of track. They're both fixers, and they're putting things together. And for a while, they even shared an office. Go ahead. Oh, and by the way, Stanley Pottinger, who died a year and a half ago, has a son, Matthew Pottinger, who has been involved with the COVID experience, working in the State Department under President Trump. He is taking after his father's footsteps. So anyway, I'll let you go back and finish.
He's a CFR member too, and everything else, and there's so much more about him. And he's a protege of General Michael Flynn. He's very much into fifth generation warfare, which in a sense is what Stanley Pottinger.
And we should tell the audience what fifth generation warfare actually is.
Okay, I'll answer three things. It's so exciting to speak to someone who knows their biscuits. But when I was describing the Iran-Contra affair, the Iran side of it was very much Pottinger and Epstein. And of course, you know, there's the money that was running through Mena, Arkansas. And later on, Epstein's buddy, Bill Clinton, was also working on the Contra side of that affair in that sense. So it looks like two CIA agents kind of combining eventually to work together after they've already worked on similar projects or funded projects within the same CIA scheme. with Stanley Pottinger, people got to know before this moment, before he's in this private banking and he's arranging around Contra, he doesn't just get there by accident. 1973 till 1979, he's involved in covering up Watergate, covering up the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. This is during while his term working for the Justice Department. He's involved in the Kent State Massacre case. He's involved in the standoff at Wounded Knee, and he's even involved in getting CIA special rights to surveil domestically, anti-constitutionally, of course, for the assassination of Orlando Letelier, after the assassination of Orlando Letelier on Embassy Row in Washington, D.C.
Let me interrupt you again. So Pottinger was incredibly good as a lawyer at figuring out how to cover up these legal cases, these investigations. So none of those cases were satisfactorily solved. In fact, Orlando Letelier was a Chilean diplomat who, with his American assistant, Ronnie Moffett, was blown up in a car in Washington, D.C. Oddly enough, the Trump DOJ just went after him recently, and I believe he's been arrested. He was living illegally in the United States for many years. But so law enforcement officers were killed at Wounded Knee, if I remember correctly, and somebody was blamed for the crime and has claimed their innocence for like 50 years. But Pottinger made sure, they always jailed somebody. They had patsies. He managed these affairs incredibly, and he was so good at it that he wound up helping to cover up the Jeffrey Epstein female abuse cases by somehow weaseling his way in and becoming one of the lawyers working for the women who were accusing Epstein of having abused them, even as children. So here's this guy who's basically CIA and has a massive history of covering up major cases over decades, and somehow he's not been acting as a lawyer for 3 or 4 decades at this point, and he worms his way in and gets to screw around and ruin the cases of these women against Epstein in the 20-teens.
I think we if we get to 5th generation warfare just by there, that's the perfect place to just explain to people something and give them context to that within the Epstein case. 5th generation warfare is, we're leaving the world of what used to be kinetic warfare, where they'd shoot you in the head or blow you up with missiles, and we're entering into a world of 5th generation warfare, which we're all aware of. It's a world of hypernormalization, logical fallacies, loads of information coming into your head all at once. You don't know what's up, you don't know what's down, and it's a war inside the brain. It's a mental war, and it's one designed to leave everybody confused and to force people into dialectically opposed arguments that then can be controlled, and you can have these leaders put into place, and blah, 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 blah. It's a very complicated world that gets worse and worse as technology progresses, and they've been mapping out for a long time. And when Epstein case kept rumbling on, between 2009 and 2011, Epstein is desperately trying to get rid of the P word label. He's going around and he's talking with loads of different people. He's meeting a lawyer in Ireland, or he's emailing a lawyer in Ireland saying, how do I get rid of this tag? And eventually he works out that's not going to happen. And they're already they see the benefit of this. They need to control the case. And I think one of the next stages that is going to be really hard for a lot of people to face is that 5th generation, this case became about 5th generation warfare very early on. This case, it was decided that they needed to do the same as they did on the first case against Epstein. When the first case started rumbling, Alex Acosta and others treated him as intelligence and knew he was intelligence. And it was all manipulated, and the case was manipulated to give Epstein the best deal. This time,
so that was the first case against Epstein, where he was found guilty, or he did a plea bargain in 2009. The case had started around 2005. And he got this really good deal where he could go to jail, sleep in the jail, but during the day he could go back to his home, work, do whatever he wanted. We don't even know if he was really in the jail at all. So he for some period of time, he spent some minimal time in a jail, but was, able to basically carry on his business at the same time, and then tried to clear himself. Sorry?
There's multiple parts to that. So he gets out in 2009. A day and a half after he gets out, he's co-funding a Edge masterclass with Elon Musk on synthetic genomics, headed by George Church and Craig Venter, the grandfathers of genomics, on how to program your genomes as though they're a computer. Yeah, with some of the heads of the technocracy at SpaceX. So Elon Musk that's a day and a half after he gets out of prison in 2009. And it was an open door prison sentence for most of it. The last part of it was 6 days a week he was able to go out of prison, but he had to sleep in prison, and then he had to stay in on a Sunday. But again, like you say, who knows, and who, it was all for show. And then it wasn't enough to put down the people's voices. Cases started coming against him, but the people who were in charge of the cases instantly were infiltrated by the CIA and knew they were being infiltrated by the CIA. So Bradley Edwards, who eventually forms Edwards Pottinger with Stanley Pottinger and managed the cases of Virginia Giuffre and many of the other key named victims. Bradley Edwards. Let's explain. Virginia Giuffre's in Australia. She gets questioned by the FBI on a couple of occasions. She comes back to America. She meets Bradley Edwards on the first day. She talks to Bradley Edwards, who's her solicitor. They're going to go into a case against Jeffrey Epstein. That night, at midnight, Stanley Pottinger calls Bradley Edwards out of the blue. They've never spoken before. And Stanley Pottinger says, hey, you might not know who I am, but I used to work for the Justice Department, blah, 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 blah. Bradley Edwards says this in detail in his book, Relentless Pursuit. And he explains in detail that he thought from the off that Stanley Pottinger was the CIA, and that Epstein had the CIA tag Virginia Giuffre's passport to know when she came back to the country so that they could instantly infiltrate. And even regardless of him saying that, Bradley Edwards forms a legal firm with him, and something really peculiar happens. And I've been working on this case for a long time. I've been working on it like in full for 7 years, really writing about it, but researching it for a long time. I tried to understand it from all different angles, and throughout my time, I had many people who were involved in the case who are big names, including some of the named victims, come to me and give me false information and try and lead me here and lead me there. And it was clear that a lot of the people who Bradley Edwards and Pottinger represented were more complicated than I first thought. And when I've investigated them, I have one really important question that has never been answered about all of the named victims that we know of, is that they all worked at some point as an adult recruiting 13, 14 and 15-year-old girls in schools and gyms and etc. Yet most of those stories we don't hear at all. We only hear the stories of the people who were paid as adults at some point. And I know there's a lot of nuance in there, a lot of complication and a lot of issue about how abuse affects victims and how Epstein and Maxwell manipulated people. But some of the stories that you learn when studying the case make you question why only the people who worked for Epstein's operation are the named victims. That is one of my biggest problems with the case. And then a large portion, maybe 3 or 4 of the main 8 victims who have come out, who have been involved in the court case and who have given their names over, have been involved with me in the real world and tried to feed me bogus information on multiple occasions. So I have, obviously, I can see that it seems like the CIA's taken control of the case. And then what the case looks like after that, well, you got to make your own mind up. But the fact is, fifth generation warfare applies. They saw this case and they said, Epstein accepted fully well. There's no way I can clear my name like this. Let's just run with it. Let's just go with it for as long as possible. Bradley Edwards admits in his book, In Relentless Pursuit, that he was having meetings with Epstein all of the way through the court cases. He doesn't ever mention these meetings, I don't think, in court. He claims that both him and Epstein had solicitors with them, and they were meeting at a Starbucks in Boca Raton regularly to discuss the cases. It seems like
okay. Let me interrupt you and let me make this clear for everybody. So here's a lawyer for Bradley Edwards, was the chief lawyer for the so-called victims of Epstein, and yet he's meeting with Epstein. That's not only unethical, it's probably illegal. And so what this really means is that the case at that point, around 2015 to 2018, was being concocted. So there was a decision made about how much and what kind of information they were going to release about Epstein. We all heard the salacious details, and they covered up everything else. And it's the everything else that is so critically important. And maybe we should move. So it's important. Even Virginia Giuffre, who was his most vocal victim, admitted that she went out and was basically a pimp for Epstein, finding young girls to bring back to him. So yeah, the girls who were successful in his network had that job to do, as Ghislaine Maxwell also had that job to do. So, victim and pimp, it's very confusing. But so Jeffrey and Pottinger and Edwards and God knows who else in the intelligence communities, because Epstein did not just work for the CIA, worked for intelligence agency. Remember, Ghislaine Maxwell's father was given some massive commendation by the Israelis for helping them. He was a secret Israeli agent. He was believed to be an agent for the Brits as well, for MI6, maybe MI5 too, if I've got that right. And Epstein probably also worked for those. He may have worked for other agencies. He was a what do we call it? He was on his own. So he was independent. He could do a job for one agency, the Russians or the Chinese, maybe, as long as he got paid for that, and then, leave them alone and work for other agencies at other times. He was not
a pleasure to be on with you. It's a pleasure to listen to you talk, because I've been ranting at brick walls for a long time when I try and explain to people what it all looks like. What you're describing there is what it looks like. Very, very, very quickly, I'll just say, in 2017, Stanley Pottinger and most of the lawyers for Epstein's victims created a company out of his Twin Lakes house. Next door was Matthew Pottinger, his son, who in 2017 had been recruited via General Flynn into Trump's administration, and was starting to work on Flynn at that time is working on fifth generation warfare. So Stanley Pottinger and Matthew Pottinger, they set up this company. Matthew Pottinger sets up a company that Maria Farmer's part of, and she's one of the ones who puts in an affidavit in 2019, while she doesn't mention she's actually working for Stanley Pottinger's legal firm. There is a lot going on there that is also fifth generation warfare, also the next generation coming up. And Epstein,
she's also dated Pottinger.
Yes.
And Pottinger also at one time had dated, what's her name, from Ms. Magazine, who admitted to being a CIA operative.
Gloria Steinem.
Gloria Steinem,
yeah.
Yes.
I cover her in Searching for Stanley documentary, if anybody wants to watch that.
Right. Anyway, so Maria Farmer is one of the people who came after Johnny here and pretended she was a victim and she had all this information, but really she was primarily working for Epstein, was probably an intelligence operative as well, and again was trying to help create a case, help determine, what was going to be part of this legal case against Jeffrey, what was going to be in and what was going to be out. And so Johnny has a lot of information about that, and it's important because Maria Farmer is probably the number 2 person we think of after Virginia Giuffre as someone who has really spilled the beans on Jeffrey Epstein. And you have to realize she's only spilled the beans that she was supposed to spill to control the image of the case. So go ahead.
Agreed. There's within that unit, when I was being managed for a while, so there was a load of people who came to me and started to feed me information, and I didn't know I was being managed. So when I was being fed all this information, I was looking around and I was finding it wasn't true. But there was a large network of people, and it was really interesting. Once Maria Farmer had tried to sell a guy called George Tonks, who I discovered had 8 different identities and was a convicted fraudster. When she was trying to get him to go on the Unlimited Hangout podcast, and Whitney asked me to vet him, and when I vetted him I found out all of this stuff, and then Maria Farmer turned on me and I realized I was into something different. And then I realized her connections with Hoffenberg, who Epstein was in business with, was something else. And then Hoffenberg's daughter came and contacted me and said, "Hey, Johnny, I can help you with investigating this woman, Kirby Summers, who I didn't really want to investigate. But she was like, I can help you look over here rather than over here." And I realized that a lot of the Epstein's old buddies are still working on this case. This is like an old CIA network working with a new 5th generation warfare CIA network, and they're kind of trading their skills, I think. They're testing things out. They're throwing things. I've been approached by so many people who are disingenuous, and then I've been approached by so many people who are genuine, and then it's like trying to understand what they are. You just got to leave people talk for long enough, and after a while, people show their true colors. And it's led me to look at the Epstein case in a whole different way, including accept that a lot of the more salacious stuff is like, some of it is tongue-in-cheek. Some of it is they've made a caricature out of this guy so you don't look at all of the rest of the stuff, and that people, the general public, and this works, the general public cannot possibly believe that Epstein's capable of being a genius, capable of running really complicated financial operations, complicated on-the-ground operations. And one of the examples of what he was doing in 2002, one of the investigations I looked into was about Epstein's favorite girl, Nicole Junkerman, comes up in the Epstein files just 4,000 and something times. They were going to get married and have a baby, just the normal stuff. And she's not young, she's not a child, so that already goes against the idea of him being a preferential offender. That's where I started on the Epstein case, because they met in Foxcote House, which was owned by Abigail Wexner, was based in Warwickshire, and they met in 2002. They flew in, so they were on the Lolita Express, flying in and flying out from Paris to Birmingham and Birmingham to Paris. I traced what they were meeting and the type of thing they were doing, and this is a really good example. It was a month before the vote to go to the Iraq War, and Epstein is meeting with a former elite model and another model at Les Wexner's mansion in the UK, with the heads of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, who Richard Shelby and Bob Graham, who are able to access any of the information from the NSA, CIA, FBI, get it all. They're the top guys. And that's the type of influence he was doing. They probably weren't recording that, though there are reports that there was lots of cameras all over the house, I have to say that. They probably weren't recording that, but it makes no difference. What they were doing was saying, hey, you guys get what you want. You get beautiful mansions in the middle of the most beautiful countryside and these beautiful women and this wonderful food and all of this. Just tell us what you know. And that's basically what it was. At the same time, Les Wexner is writing the Luntz-Wexner analysis with Frank Luntz, and they're looking at how to influence America to go to war with Iraq. So this was on behalf of Israel. He was working for so many different people. I said to someone once, you know, something big, and any investigator, hey, you know, this is something you can investigate. That he was probably selling, him and Clinton, when they went to China, it's likely they were doing what this group always do, which is proliferate some form of nuclear weapons technology to the Chinese for large amounts of money. Useful technology. He wasn't just doing like little things. This guy was the boss of the, you know, running operations, and he was hanging out with presidents and prime ministers because he was the boss, and they all needed his help. And if you want something like that done, you can't just do it in the clear world. In reality, you have to be able to say, hey, you over there, in secret, you can trust me because I'm the main guy and I can get this done. Whatever you need done, just come to me and I will work it out. That's what he was.
Yes. So I want to say a few things. So Epstein, early in his life, because of his involvement with the Iran-Contra business, he was in his late 20s or maybe 30 years old. I think what happened is, as you said, he was picked up somehow. He was found to be very charismatic, charming, brilliant, and have no scruples, no morals, no ethics. He would do anything, and he wanted to be rich, you know, and he liked pretty girls. And so the system figured out how they could control him and how they could use him, and how they could have a mutually beneficial relationship. I can say that, look, when I was a kid, when I was, I think, 14, I had some testing that I did, and they picked me to be like an astrophysicist. And I started getting sent to Columbia University to take advanced courses in astrophysics at the age of 15 on Saturdays. You know, and then and then I went to MIT, went into science, and then decided to, you know, there was too much bad stuff coming from physics. It was all weapons. And so I moved into medicine. But yes, in the United States, especially in the New York area, there were ways to find these children whom the system wanted to be able to help manage their future careers. And I'm sure that Jeffrey Epstein probably got picked up into a program, you know, like that, but maybe a little different. There were also, apparently, if you read these horrible books, children were being picked up and trained to be spies, and trained to be prostitutes, trained to fly airplanes and helicopters, you know, as teenagers or preteens, and carry out all sorts of jobs for the intelligence agencies. So this was all going on then. Presumably it's still going on. A lot of it happens in military families. They will actually target the children of military officers. And
Interesting.
I'm not sure how that works, but I mean, John McCain's father was an admiral. You know, these things run in families. It's easy if you're going to be doing this crooked stuff. It's good if you can get someone from a family who's already doing the crooked stuff and they've grown up with it. And that's why Matthew Pottinger is important. You know, that's why John McCain was important, and many of these others had anyway.
There is just quickly, there's one person. I went back into the history and looked at these networks in the past, intergenerationally, you know, went back a few generations, and discovered a man called Horace Dibin. I'll describe very quickly. His father was Plymouth Brethren, very strict. He was part of the Royal Air Force during the war, did lots of bombing raids. They didn't know whether they'd survive. So many people got shot down during World War II. They were living on the edge all the time. And when he came back into the London set after the war, these were really hardened guys who had, you know, had less scruples and had seen really terrible things at war. And Horace Dibin was the man who created Pygmalion girls, including Mariella Novotny, who was smuggled out of JFK's bedchamber, picking up buy-in girls at the age of 12 to 14 from people's fathers to make them into these women eventually who would do anything in the spy games. He was the one who created the Man in the Mask parties that were used in Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. And he was, if you actually follow the story of Horace Dibbin, you can see a perfect example of a hardened man who's gone through military with connections and organizations, learning that without scruples he can make a lot of money by dabbling in the idea of the dark arts and using very young girls as fodder for very wealthy people. And he turned in the bigger circles. He took over the West End nightclubs, and this is where all of the dead letter drops were going on during the Soviet era. And he was sneaking his Pygmalion girls into people's bedchambers, and it led to the downfall of the British government. John Profumo was actually the Minister of War in the UK, was actually in bed with a load of Horace Dibbin's trained Pygmalion girls, and that got outed and the whole thing.
Who had Russian boyfriends. So
Yes.
I was a teenager when that happened. So I remember it being in the newspaper. So yes,
Indeed.
Profumo was the Minister of Defense in the UK, and he was having an affair with Christine somebody. Keeler, whose boyfriend was a Russian spy. So
that's a hard one. That's I think that you might be Russian spy. I can't remember if Christine Keeler was described as Stephen Ward's
yes, he was her pimp, I think.
Yeah, but he was okay. He's an amazing. So basically, just very quickly, he did the exact thing that Ghislaine Maxwell did in Epstein's operation. He did that role, and it's quite amazing. He did it for a guy as well, the A&P grocery heir in America, George Huntington Hartford II, who he recruited girls for. It's basically the Epstein operation in the past. It's very interesting. I wrote a series called The Black Hand about that.
Right. You know, we've left out a lot about all the other things Epstein was doing. So besides money laundering, figuring out newer cryptocurrency methods and other things, he also figured out how to use NGOs and get money for supposedly philanthropic purposes, but really it wasn't. It was for spy purposes, and he was able to get people together. So he had these parties. He could get, Nobel Prize winners. He could get Stephen Hawking. He could get Noam Chomsky. He could get all these people to show up on his island or show up at his New York apartment or Palm Beach or New Mexico, and get them talking to each other. But what we haven't talked about is, in addition to that, he had developed, along with a few other people, a training program for the technocrats who are the wealthiest people in the world today.
Yes.
And maybe we're going to have to do that on another show, but these technocrats who were trained by Epstein decades ago when they were in their 20s include the two founders of Google, the founder of Amazon, who else? Peter Thiel, PayPal
Peter Thiel
founders.
doesn't really go on there, but all Peter Thiel's people go on there. The founder of Spotify goes on there as well. Evan Williams, who's managing director of Twitter at the time, and Salah Kamangu, who's deputy head of YouTube at that time. All of these guys are involved in Edge Masterclasses, which literally design the next generation and the future, our future. They very quickly, they call these people choice architects. They make our choices for us. They give us crap one, crap two, and then we take the worst of them.
This is what I think we should do, Johnny. I want the audience to understand that. Let's do that for our next show in 2 weeks.
Okay, I can do that. Very
and
happy.
I think I hope we've whetted everybody's appetite, because this is big. This is really big. This is how you will understand who Jeffrey Epstein really was and why he was so well protected, and why he has helped to design, our dystopian future, the one that we have to stop. And by understanding it, we are in a much better position to stop it. So do you, again, how can people reach you? On newspaste.com. Where else?
I tell people, just go to newspace.com. Every platform, if you type in Johnny Vedmore, you'll find me. One of the best ways to support me, I mean, you can buy me coffee, become Patreon. Substack is a really good place to help me with my work. But one of the best ways and simplest ways, and literally no money to you, is to go to something like Spotify or Google Play, go to my music and just add one of my songs to the playlist, play it once a month, and that helps me get on the algorithm. So eventually maybe I can make money out of music, and that can actually fund my journalism. That's what I'm aiming for now. So any way you can support me, I love it. But Newspaste is my central hub.
All right. This has been wonderful. Well, you're good for 2 weeks? 2 weeks from
I'm
today?
good for 2 weeks. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Excellent.
And then we're going to write, Kelly. She gets to travel up front with us all, Daniel. And all the others.
My name is Kim Thehoff,
And this is a story about your beautiful little girl, Kelly.
and this is her story.
All right, and it's only 2 months. She's only had 2 months.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what happened.
Well, I'm going to kind of start past when the event happened because there's more to the story. And this may be a lot of people's story. I've thought about this a lot. I know I can't be the only person this happened to. She died in 1980. But at the autopsy, the doctor that did the autopsy told us that there was encephalopathy, and he led us to believe that that happened when she died as a result of her dying. And I was a very young mother. I was only 22 years old, and I had no idea. You know, I was still in shock. Okay, I'd already been through the sheriff comes to the house and asks you questions, and they're going to make sure that there's nothing criminal that happened and those kind of things. So I didn't believe that a healthy baby could just stop breathing. None of us have to remember to breathe, but they said SIDS. That's what they said. And so for years and years and years and years and years and years, I knew nothing. So in 2011, I lost my job, and I got myself a new cell phone in August, and my older daughter, was asking me if I had been seeing or had heard about a special that was on CNN. And it's kind of a controversial subject, much like this subject, but it was Sanjay Gupta, weed. And I was like, no, I haven't heard of that. And so she tells me what it's about, and I'm kind of looking on my phone now because I can do that instead of sit at the computer. And I find it, and I see what it's about, and that, it's about, this particular one was about children that had seizure disorders that were not controlled by medication. So they're giving these children marijuana, cannabis, to help control the seizures. So, I'm just do that, but I'm a voracious reader. And so I started thinking, what other things could I read about and look up, and all kinds of things. And I just kind of, if you will, I kind of stumbled into vaccine injury. And just in November of 2015, I put it all together, what happened, because I had no idea. I mean, when they tell you SIDS, what do? You have no recourse. You just have to take it. And I've heard several stories of people that have said that they figured out later on that this is what happened. But oddly enough, the doctor who did the autopsy, the coroner's office, the hospital where she died, Her pediatrician, nobody has any of her records. They're all gone. So I sent away for her death certificate so that I could see it, because I'd never seen it. I knew she was dead. I didn't need to see it, you know. And so he wrote sudden infant death syndrome, and then the second reason he wrote was septicemia with a question mark after it. And when I started really looking up like encephalopathy and septicemia, how does a less than a 2-month-old baby get that? It had to be the vaccines. There was no other, nothing else was going on with this child. She was perfectly healthy. She was perfectly fine. And people that I speak to on Facebook and, you know, through email and stuff.
Do you remember how long after her vaccines that she died?
Well, back then we went for 6 weeks checkups, and we were getting ready to move from one part of one county to another. And so I remember I went for a 6-week checkup, and I think that she went with me. And so it was between 6 weeks and that week before we moved, and she was less than 8 weeks old. She was 7.5 weeks old when she passed away. And there was nothing. There was no sign. I mean, I put her down to sleep, and I, you know, went back a couple hours later to check on her, and she was gone. I mean, and, you know, it was horrific. It was something that you never, ever think is going to happen to you. And from that day forward, I've never, ever thought that again, that this, whatever, anything couldn't happen to me, because probably the worst thing that could ever happen to me happened to me. So, and you know, I tried to get confirmation, but even I've heard so many people, even earlier today, the lady said, both those ladies this morning said they go back to the doctor and no doctor will say, you know, and I think it's a crime. I think it's a crime that they can get away with saying this. And then I think of all the people, like when I went through the sheriff coming to the house and asking me questions and looking at her bed and the whole thing, you know. And some people, I mean, people are in prison for doing something to their children that they didn't do. And, you know, you're falling apart. I fell apart. I fell apart after she passed away. And, I mean, my marriage disintegrated. And if it wouldn't have been for my older daughter, I wouldn't have made it. And I know lots of people feel that way. And I'm sure there's some people that haven't. I believe that. It's a painful thing. And it's been 36 years, but it took me 35 years to figure out what happened. And so last year was the first year on her birthday and on the anniversary of her death that I had any idea what had happened to her. And so it kind of brought it all, you know, a little closer to the surface, if you will. And there are some people that are still going through it, you know. I mean, and people like your family and the Chollicks, you know, their children are injured and they live every day with that. I'm hoping that it changes soon. I believe it will.
There's no words really.
No, there are none.
She's adorable.
She was. And you know, I believed in vaccines. I have 3 children. They were all, you know, the one that was born after her, fully vaccinated, because I was clueless. And I didn't even find out until 2015 about the vaccine injury compensation program. I went and talked to my senator, or my representative. She knew nothing about it either. You know, it's not right.
So, what is your advice to the young parent, the young 22-year-old mother who is about to vaccinate her daughter because the doctors tell her it's safe?
She needs to do tons and tons of research. Back in 1980, there probably were people that knew that they weren't safe, but there wasn't a way to get that information out to the masses like there is now. And there wasn't an easy way to look at all of that, to go somewhere without leaving your home and taking your children and doing research.
You know what's incredible to me, that this was happening, so far back in the 80s and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If they just admitted the truth back then, none of our children
I know.
would
I
be
think
damaged.
about that. I think about
Think
that.
about all these babies here
Yes.
that would be saved
Mhm.
if they'd just done what they should have done in the first place.
That's right. If they wouldn't have lied, they would have listened.
Someone's asking you who your senators are.
Bob Hall is one of my senators. Well, Ted Cruz was one of my senators, state senators, but I went to my local. So Bob Hall is my representative in Texas, my senator, and Cindy Burkett is the woman that I spoke to that's in my district, 113, and she had no idea. She had no idea.
Well, we need to write your daughter's name on the bus. You've already submitted your story to Facts.com.
I
Well
did.
done. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Baby Kelly is up front with Daniel and our lovely girls. And so they will travel with us right to the end of this.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.